Hello everyone. Today we will learn about aerobic respiration. Have you ever wondered if the plants can breathe? Yes, they do. Actually, they breathe all day and all night, except during the day. They can do photosynthesis as well. Therefore, they're generating oxygen through photosynthesis and they use that oxygen for their own respiration. But somehow, when they do photosynthesis, they breathe out a lot of oxygen that can be available for other organisms like us that we cannot make oxygen ourselves. But during the night, they stop doing photosynthesis. They need oxygen to breathe. Therefore, some people say you should not bring your plant inside the indoor during the night because they will suck up all the oxygen and you will be lack of oxygen during the night. Alright, let's compare how respiration and photosynthesis can be compared. So in this screen, I can show you that aerobic respiration is just the reverse process of photosynthesis. How do I mean by that? So photosynthesis, you start with electron transport chain or ETC in this abbreviation. You start with splitting water, and by splitting water, you get oxygen as the result. Apart from oxygen, you also get electron, and that electron can be transferring for with different electron carriers, and by transferring electron, the last electron acceptor is NADP plus, and you generate NADPH, which is the reducing power. Along the way that you transferring an electron, the complex or some photosystem or cytochrome or plastoquinone will pump hydrogen out of the thylakoid lumen, and that will create the transferring of ADP with pyrophosphate, and you will get ATP as the result. So both NADPH and ATP is the products of electron transport chain in photosynthesis, and by making ATP using the differences in proton gradients between inside and outside of the thylakoid membrane, we call that process as photophosphorylation. Phosphorylation is just mean adding the phosphate to ADP. Photos mean light, so by the process of light, you make ATP. So these two products will get into the Calvin-Benson cycle in order to assimilate carbon dioxide, and you get glucose as the products. On the other hand, in aerobic respiration, like I said, it is the reverse process. So you start from citric acid cycle. You put the glucose in and you breathe out carbon dioxide. See, this is the opposite of the Calvin-Benson cycle. And at the end, you get NADH and FADH2 as two reducing powers. And these two reducing power will release electron in the mitochondrial electron transport chain. And the last electron acceptor is oxygen. By gaining electron, oxygen combine with proton, and it will make water as the final products. During the process of electron transport chain in mitochondria, you can make ATP by using the proton gradients that is different between inside the matrix and intermembrane space of mitochondria. And this process, we call it oxidative phosphorylation. Later in this lecture, you will learn that by doing glucose breakdown in glycolysis and also in citric acid cycle, you can make ATP as well. And those process is not the same with making ATP from the mitochondria. In this part, we will call it substrate level phosphorylation. Alright, let's go into the detail with the aerobic respiration. So you start. Actually, I should mention this first. In all organisms, we need to use oxygen to do aerobic respiration, except some bacteria that can live without oxygen. But most organisms need oxygen, and we do aerobic respiration. And most of those organisms use glucose as the main source of energy to enter aerobic respiration. However, plants mostly use sucrose as the substrate for entering aerobic respiration because sucrose is the main product from photosynthesis. I will show you later why. So let's start with sucrose. The number of carbon is double compared to glucose, is C12, and you add oxygen and water. During this process, it's all about redox reaction. What is redox? I mentioned it in the last lecture, right? So sucrose can donate electron to oxygen. So by losing electron, sucrose is become oxidized. This is the process of sucrose oxidation. And oxygen is gaining electron. Gaining electron creating less oxidation number. So that means oxygen is reduced in the process of oxygen reduction to create water. So by this process, you're gaining ATP and metabolic intermediates that serve as substrate for the synthesis of nucleic acid, amino acid, fatty acid, and many secondary metabolites. So in general, the process of respiration in plants is similar or the same as in other organisms, but there are some differences unique to plants that evolve to deal with environmental and metabolic commonly faced by plants. Right? So this is an overview of aerobic respiration in plants, starting from sucrose with oxygen, some water, and you get carbon dioxide and more water. And respiration scheme, you mainly get the very negative number of delta G or free energy of the reaction. This is mean it is thermodynamic driving force for producing ATPs can occur spontaneously, except the fact that there will be some transition state that you need a little kick of energy to reduce the activation energy. There are 4 processes in respiration. The first 2 is the oxidation of glucose. We can do it 2 ways. The first one is glycolysis. You digest sucrose, and sucrose is the carbon 12 sugar, and you end up with carbon 3 sugar pyruvate, and you gain some ATP, and more importantly is the reducing power in ADH. An alternative pathway of glycolysis is pentose phosphate pathway, or we can call it oxidative pentose phosphate pathway. And in all organisms, we do have pentose phosphate pathway, except in plants, we have some special. So in plants, This pathway can be located in both cytosol and in plastid. Plastid is chloroplast mainly. And from the name, you can guess that the final product of this reaction is the sugar will contain only 5 carbon. So because pentose is mean 5 carbon sugar, and you starting from hexose. Hexose is the sugar containing 6 carbon. Hexose phosphate is the substrate, and you get pentose phosphate as the product, and you get another reducing power, NADPH. If you recall, NADPH is the product of electron transport chain in photosynthesis as well. So you now both glycolysis and pentose phosphate pathway, you get reducing power in different form, NADH from glycolysis and NADPH from oxidative pentose phosphate pathway. And let's come back to the mainstream of oxidizing of sugar. So from glycolysis, you got the 3-carbon compound pyruvate, and this pyruvate will enter citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle. You may have been familiar with it better, or tricarboxylic acid cycle. They are the same. So tricarboxylic acid cycle or citric acid cycle take place in mitochondrial matrix. Matrix is the innermost space of mitochondria, and from pyruvate you will get carbon dioxide, the two form of reducing power, NADH and FADH2, and you gain a little bit of ATP. ATP from glycolysis and from citric acid cycle. These are obtained by the chemical reaction that other chemical reaction that create energy to phosphorylate ADP, and you get ATP. And ATP from these two reactions, we will call it substrate level phosphorylation. So from these three reaction, these three pathway, you get some reducing powers. And these reducing power NADH, NADPH, and FADH2 will enter mitochondrial matrix or in inner mitochondrial membrane in order to pass their electron through electron carriers in order to generate ATP. And ATP generating through this pathway, we would call it oxidative phosphorylation. Right? This is the overview. So you start from sugar, which is mainly sucrose, and then you can enter glycolysis, and sugar can become hexose, and hexose can be the substrate for pentose phosphate pathway in cytosol and also in plastid or chloroplast. From glycolysis, you start from 6 carbon sugar, and then you will end up with 3 carbon sugar that can be modified into organic acid, and this organic acid can enter citric acid cycle to generate more NADH and FADH2, and you enter electron transport chain to make more ATP. Alright. If you link the photosynthesis in this picture together, photosynthesis generate glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which is the 3-carbon sugar containing phosphate. We call it triose. Triose can also be a substrate for glycolysis, and can enter the pentose phosphate pathway to make NADPH, and you also get carbon dioxide as a product. Triols can also form hexose phosphate or 6-carbon sugar, and this 6-carbon sugar, mainly glucose, can also make sugar or can make starch. When breaking starch, you get either glucose, sucrose, or oligosaccharides, and that can enter glycolysis further. Right? So I will stop right here and we will come back with more of the glycolysis.